Hi, I'm Angie Hicks, co-founder of Angie. One thing I've learned is that you buy a house, but you make it a home. And for decades, Angie's helped millions of homeowners hire skilled pros for the projects that matter. Get all your jobs done well at Angie.com.
At Arizona State University, we made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Presenting the archive. Classic episodes that remain timeless. The raw, unfiltered conversations from the early days in which people shared their failures and showed us exactly how they rebuilt everything from the ground up.
Tim Ferriss, you've done a billion things. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Really happy to be here.
Tim, I have one small beef to pick with you, which I'm going to bring up. We know each other now. We've known each other for, I guess, about almost a year and a half since a conference like at the end of 2012 or 2011. I forget, one of those years. Mm-hmm. But before that, you released The 4-Hour Body. I was around the corner in the freezing cold waiting to get into that event in downtown New York.
Oh, I'm so sorry. That was a mess. That was such a mess. So one thing, just a word to the wise for people listening. If you ever hold an event in the winter, it might be a crowded venue. Make sure that if they have a mandatory coat check for fire code, that they tell you about it beforehand. That is what held up the line. And the poor people waiting outside in normal sort of cocktail party clothing on the coldest day of the winter in that year. It was horrible. What a disaster that was. I apologize for that.
No, don't apologize, because from every problem, there's a lesson to be learned. And we have a lot of things to talk about. But I learned a couple of things from that. One is you were trying something different with marketing. In general, that's been your approach, where not only do you have the event of a book launch, but your marketing events themselves are newsworthy events. So you've changed marketing for books for everyone. And that was part of it. And there's going to be mistakes along the way. That will happen. But also, you dealt with it instantly. So, of course, you must have gotten many emails the next day. And you right away made a response. Everybody gets X, Y, and Z. You dealt with it right away. And it proved to be a successful event for you. Also, it made us think, everybody in line think, oh my God, this book is going to be such a massive success. Like, we really created this aura of success around the book, even though we were freezing. It was like the coldest I've ever been in my life.
It was so cold. Yeah, it was something like 10 degrees outside, and there were people freezing their asses off. So I did learn a lot from that, and thank you for the kind words. Yeah, it was. I will do another event, and it will be in a warmer season too, just as a safety net.
Well, you're a good event holder, so I will hold you to that. Now, I've had a lot of guests on the podcast, and you've now started your podcast, so you know what it's like preparing for a podcast, reading the materials of your guests and so on. But you're a particularly hard guest to prepare for. And I even, we've spoken, I know you, I've read all your stuff in the past, and I read them again in preparation for this, as well as gone over many of your other things. But you've done so many different things, and I've been trying to categorize in one word what you do. And I think most people would say the number 4, but I'm not going to say that. I think if I were to say one word, your books are really about possibility. So on one side, we have the probable. So we all grow up with this education thinking, okay, if I go to standard school, standard college, standard graduate school, work a 9-to-5 job, have a family, things will somewhere along the line go well for me, and I might find happiness. So we're taught from an early age that this is the probable sequence of events if we want happiness. But you instead talk about possibilities that the average person might not have thought of, and that might lead to some version of happiness or success, or however you define it, much more quickly than anybody would have realized. Would you kind of say that's a general theme?
Coaches or teachers or friends of friends who have shown me that some of the impossibles are negotiable, and that many of the things you might perceive as being impossible are in fact very, very, very achievable. Not only possible, but easily achievable, such as fluency in languages, for as one example where myths are run rampant within the language learning sort of gestalt. People believe things such as, children learn languages faster than adults. False. It takes a lifetime to become fluent in a language. False. And you can disprove all of these things relatively easily if you search for the anomalies and the outliers, which is what I do.
Well, that's interesting. I want to get back to the language learning and also your phrase, possibility is negotiable. But a lot of people ask, how do I find a mentor? And I think this is the wrong question. And you sort of allude to it just then, that these people don't necessarily have the title of mentor, but how would you define it? How would you answer that question if someone said, how do I find a mentor?
The way you find a mentor, in my personal experience at least, is by understanding that you should aim to learn before you earn. And that sounds very cliched, but I feel like your objective as a younger person, and I'll just limit the discussion to people sort of in their formative early careers, let's just say 20s, early 30s, that you should aim to surround yourself with the 4 or 5 people you want to be the average of. And if you're able to do that, for instance, by joining, say, a startup where you report directly to a VP or a co-founder, and you get to observe them making deals, negotiating with employees, settling disputes, so on and so forth, you will become the average of those people. And whether that is through explicit teaching or just implicit observation and absorption, I really feel like it's, in some cases, volunteering. In my case, for example, when I moved to Silicon Valley, this was in 99, 2000, just at the apex, the top of the roller coaster.
Good timing.
Yeah, good timing. So I got to agreed rent that was stratospheric, and then wait for my income to crash. But the point I was going to make is I volunteered for startup organizations that held events, and I took on more and more and more responsibility as a volunteer until they looked to me for leadership roles and invited me to help determine the content of events. And eventually I was able to manage the production of an entire 500-person event where I recruited the speakers. What did that turn into? Well, it turned into relationships with people I wanted to get to know and that I wanted to have a relationship with, like Jack Canfield, co-creator of Chicken Soup for the Soul, who many, many years later ended up introducing me to the editor who became my agent, who helped me go through 27 rejections and sell the 4-Hour Workweek. So,
I think people don't realize this, but that kind of incremental things like that, like for instance, you meeting Jack Canfield, like maybe you picked him to be in a conference, maybe you picked him up at the airport to take him to the conference, I don't know. But little incremental things like that compound. And so 4 hours a week compounds 10 years later into, this is the guy who basically helped you create massive bestsellers.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And, I think that Silicon Valley, for all its flaws, is philosophically a very interesting ecosystem to study. And what I mean by that is there are certain beliefs and belief systems in Silicon Valley among the people who are the best entrepreneurs and investors that are worth emulating. And one of them is you can pass on hundreds and hundreds of fantastic deals and opportunities as long as you get a few right. What I mean by that is there may be, let's say, 10 to 15 startups per year that are going to have a Series A funding round that will turn into multi-billion-dollar companies. Let's just say that hypothetically. You don't need to get into all 15 of those. In fact, you can miss all of those deals for many years. And let's just say you have an angel investing career of 10 years and you invest in 1 or 2 of those, you've made your entire career. And the way that that translates to normal non-Silicon Valley life is you don't need to approach every potential mentor you're excited about and immediately hump their leg and start pitching the shit out of yourself. You can take your time and develop loose ties to these people where you add value where you can. You don't rush it. You don't make 20 email intros a week to play matchmaker. you take it very slow and steady. And, as Gary Vaynerchuk would say, you don't act like a 19-year-old guy on his first date every time. You just, you play it smooth. And that doesn't mean you're lazy. It means that you spread your bets, and naturally a handful of those relationships will become real friendships. And you need a basis, in my experience, a basis for friendship and rapport and camaraderie before asking for any type of favor makes any sense. And by the way, in my experience, if you develop that type of genuine relationship, the person you would perhaps refer to as your mentor will offer to help you. They will ask how they can help you. You don't have to strong arm them at all. You don't even need to introduce the favor itself, because they'll express to you a willingness to help, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, I will tell you, in every experience I've had, whether I've been starting companies, selling companies, offering services to get customers, whatever it was always from me first soft shoeing it, basically just offering ideas or the most smallest of connections that I could make, and then spreading it out as, throwing as wide a net as possible, and just gradually over months and years, pursuing those connections. That's always planting the seeds grows the garden. That strategy has always worked for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's possible to be proactive without rushing. I think that is a sweet spot that's
a key. That's a key phrase.
Yeah, people need to practice. It does take practice to learn skill, but getting what you want without being proactive, without being a hard seller. And there are times to hard sell, but it's less often than one might imagine. You don't have to be. Yeah, I was just gonna say, there is a time and a place to be Alec Baldwin from Glengarry Glen Ross and always be closing. That's not all the time, in my experience.
And I think that's less and less now with, because social media allows you to create that wide net without doing the hard sell, which didn't occur, during Glengarry Glen Ross.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed.
Now, you mentioned experimentation. I agree that's a very important part of your books, but combined with that is sort of this almost supernatural ability to learn that is kind of emanates through all of your books, where you have, it's almost like you have this process where you take anything and you're able to kind of break it into its components, observe it, see what components are the 80-20, which 20% of the components give 80% of the value. Then you try, then you that's when you start the experiment. Then you have feedback, then you repeat. And often there's a mentor in there, like in your TV show in the first episode, you had Stuart Copeland in there,
right,
giving you feedback on how you were drumming, and also watching him drum allowed you to kind of break apart the components. But I see this sort of cycle, almost virtuous cycle, in all three of your books. How do you learn to break apart something into its critical components, whatever it is you're trying to learn? Let's say you're trying to learn poker, for instance.
So in the case of poker or surfing or investing, for that matter, startup investing, I think that there's a general framework that I follow, which is represented by an acronym DISS. The I is silent, so it's deconstruction, selection, sequencing, and stakes. And in some of these instances, the stakes, the consequences are built in. So if you're putting money on the line in the case of poker or investing, the stakes are somewhat built in. If you're trying to change your diet, for instance, it's not always quite as clear. You need to build in short-term consequences. But the deconstruction phase is a step where you try to take something that is very large and nebulous, like learn poker, and break that down into what it might mean. And it's really an information gathering stage, much like doing notes or a first draft of a book that you later intend to chop down to 1/3 the size.
So you could be wrong at this level. You could be drastically wrong at this level.
There's no wrong or right at this level because you're gathering different tools and resources and hypotheses. And the way you go about doing that is principally through, of course, online research. I use tools like Evernote to pull things offline and to clip web pages and so on into folders, which I did for poker, in fact, once I was into the learning process. And then secondly, I will interview people. So try whenever possible to find breeds of players who are dramatically different in their approaches and ideally anomalous within the poker world. For instance, it is widely assumed that you need to be very, very good at probabilities in mathematics, at least basic statistics, in the world of poker. Are there people, however, who play on a more instinctual level, who are playing the players as opposed to the probabilities? And I might seek someone out with that profile. On the flip side, I might look for someone who's very, very quantitative, and they might not be a professional player per se. They could be someone like one of the co-founders of Renaissance, which is a hedge fund, or one of these hedge fund managers who plays in SALT, which is a conference, and goes to the tables and wins hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars as non-professional players. How do they take their quantitative apparatus and apply it to poker? So I'll start gathering media stories, Wikipedia entries, so on and so forth, and eventually narrow down a handful of people that I want to interview. And it seems people erroneously assume that you have to be a best-selling author or whatever it might be to interview people. Not true at all. There are many easy ways to do it. Number one, you may not be able to interview, say, a gold medalist in the current Olympics because everyone's trying to get a hold of them, but could you find a silver medalist in the same event from 2 Olympics ago that you could jump on Skype with and use video for an hour and pay perhaps $50 to $100? Probably. It sounds insane, but it's very, very possible.
From my own experience, that's definitely true. Like, for instance, I always try to get better at chess. I can't get in touch with the world chess champion, but I can certainly get in touch with someone who won the U.S. chess championship 10 years ago. Is always possible.
Oh, absolutely. So you can do that for free, you can pay out of pocket, or guess what? It's like develop a basic level of writing ability or conduct an interview for a media outlet. And it could be a local outlet, the Sacramento Bee, whatever it might be, right? Choose your outlet and spec out a Q&A with someone that you want to develop a relationship with. You're offering value in the form of exposure if they want it. And throughout that process, you have, let's say, 12 questions that make it to print, and you ask 20, 8 of which are related to trying to deconstruct their skill. And again, take your time. You don't need to then close after that and ask them for free mentorship for life, which is what a lot of people do. They're like, oh, hey, could you be my mentor, i.e. unpaid part-time assistant for the rest of my life? No, that's not what you want to ask people to do. So the deconstruction process is really about teasing out leads. It's sort of acting as a detective and looking for people who also are very good at something who shouldn't be, right? So if you're trying to become...
What do you mean by shouldn't be?
Well, people who apparently lack the attributes of someone who typifies a given skill. So you might look at ultra endurance running, where the guys who are the best and the women who are the best tend to look like spiders. They tend to be built like Jack from The Nightmare Before Christmas. So what if you could find, and I'll actively seek these people out, I'll reach out to, say, the editors of magazines, writers in the field, whatever, and I'll say, who is good at this, who shouldn't be? I.e., are there any people who are massively overweight or who weigh 250 pounds, who aren't overweight, just huge muscular people, who run ultra endurance marathons? Like they're structurally, they shouldn't be able to do it, but are there any people? And then I'll seek them out. And those are people who need to compensate for mediocre attributes with superior technique very often, or superior training, more intelligent training. And I find those cases always very, very interesting.
So that's almost like, I would say, the secret ingredient in the soup, seeking these people out.
I think that's a huge part of it. Another example would be trying to identify, for instance, successful business people who are severely dyslexic. And there are quite a few examples. Charles Schwab is one, the founder of Kinko's, ironically enough. And you can go down the line and find people who have overcome apparent handicaps that many other people would view as terminal in these fields, and identify what they're doing right. So I think something that's very underleveraged is the Paralympics, for instance. Like, you want to learn how to swim? Like, study someone who doesn't have legs. Like, what are they doing differently? Seriously, it's like, that is just a gold mine, I think, for dissecting what is possible and what is not.
All right, so let's say you wanted to get to be a good surgeon, right? Let's say there was no such thing as medical school and you wanted to be a good surgeon. What type of person would you look for?
Well, I would contact anyone tangentially related to surgery, right? Someone, a friend of mine who is a surgeon or who has had surgery, therefore has contact with a surgeon, and reach out to people in the field to ask, who in your field is controversial, but very good at what they do, That's another question that I find very helpful. Who is good at this who shouldn't be? And I would give them the examples of, say, dyslexics or people who were not able to undertake conventional training, or people who skipped conventional training in some fashion, anyone who's taken a circuitous route. And usually with those questions alone, I'll be able to get a hold of a lead. And that's all I'm looking for. I'm looking for a scent trail, right? So if I find out there's a controversial doctor who's doing really interesting rehabilitative work, for instance. So tennis elbow, chronic injuries, things that are thought to never go away very oftentimes. Who's somebody who's controversial, who's working in this field? And I might find someone who's using, let's say, PRP injections, where they pull out your whole blood, spin it in a centrifuge, take out the growth factors, and inject them locally into, say, tennis elbow, which can be very effective. And that
sounds like it sounds like a lot of fun. I'm gonna have to install that in my house.
Yeah, you can get a home PRP unit. Just jab
my blood out there.
Just jab syringes in your kneecaps while you're sitting on the toilet. And that is all I'm looking for in that original conversation or email thread is a foot in the door. I want a name. I want a university, a lab, something that will allow me to examine someone who is controversial yet effective, or who's very good at something despite handicaps, lack of training, whatever it might be. So that would be the first step I would take. Like if we got off the phone right now, I would send emails to a handful of people I know are either surgeons or have interacted with surgeons.
I see. So and then again, finding that person who stands out for something unconventional, like whether they're dyslexic or they had weird training or they shake a little, or maybe they have no arms. That would be an interesting one.
Yeah, somebody who performs surgery without manual dexterity. And there are examples, I'm sure, of people who developed, say, a tremor who then proceed to address the tremor somehow, right? The process of figuring this stuff out, and I just want to point out the underlying theme here, is that if you're trying to learn anything and explore the possibilities, right? What is possible and what is not? You have to test assumptions. And the way you test assumptions, the way you test the obvious, is by asking seemingly absurd questions. So, how would I win a swimming race without legs? If I had to run a business in 2 or 4 hours a week, or my business, whatever that happens to be, I know it's impossible, but what would I do? If I had a gun against my head, if I had terminal cancer and couldn't work for more than, I was having chemotherapy and couldn't work for more than 4 hours a week, what would I actually do? Asking these constraining, absurd questions.
So it sounds to me like over time, and this is really where you put in your hours, where you were learning how to ask these impossible questions, because not everyone says, oh, how can I work a 4-hour week? Most people say, well, I have bills to pay. I need to work my 9-to-5 job. That was what I was taught all my life. I need to do this. And so people don't learn to ask these impossible questions.
That's right. Yeah, and it's very often trained out of you.
I would almost say that success in a meager way is like the enemy of possibility. So people find some degree of success. Oh, well, I am paying my bills with a 9-to-5 job. So that almost prevents them from looking at what's possible. It suddenly success defined for them what was impossible because, I found success. I have a 9-to-5 job.
Right. I agree. And I think that it's very easy to go from a proactive to protective mindset. And it's human nature. I mean, this is very much, I think, animal nature. You build your nest, you have your mate, you have your territory, and then you just fight people off. That's the general programming. And I think that it's very important in modern life, assuming that most people listening to this live in probably have white collar jobs, although it applies elsewhere, is that when you're, and it applies far outside of this, but the definition of risk is very important. I think that one of the reasons that so few people do bold things is because they don't define risk at all. They have a nebulous fear of a worst case scenario, of having too little money, whatever it might be, but they don't define it very clearly, which is why I encourage people to do this fear setting exercise instead of goal setting, which is look at the decision you're considering, the project you're considering, pursuing, for instance, that would dramatically change your life, whatever. Maybe you have to quit your 9-to-5 job or whatnot. And you make a list on a piece of paper. I usually just draw 2 vertical lines, so I have 3 columns. First category is, what are the worst things that could happen in excruciating detail? Like, let's get very, very specific, right? So all of the worst things that could happen, however absurd, write those down if you pursue this. Second column is, what could you do to minimize the likelihood of those things happening? And then the last category is, if those things happen, what could you do to get back to where you are now? And you run through this exercise and you realize that if you define risk as the likelihood of an irreversible negative outcome, which is how I define it, okay, so the risk is a likelihood of an irreversible negative outcome, there's very little risk. There's very, very little risk. And this is typically the inflection point for a lot of people who have a lot of undefined fear.
It seems like there's a little more than that, in that you can mitigate that left-hand column a lot by doing kind of these mini experiments. Like in the 4-hour body, you're constantly experimenting on your body, but you're not doing it all at once. You're doing little experiments here, little experiments there. And that's how you mitigate the risk, for instance, of destroying your body with too many experiments at once.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And it's also true with any kind of career shift. I think it's easy for human beings to look at choices as dichotomous or mutually exclusive at the very least. So it's either I have a 9-to-5 job, or I throw a Hail Mary, I quit my job and stomp out like Edward Norton in Fight Club, and all of a sudden I have to fend for myself in the wild world, and maybe I can't pay my rent. You don't have to do that. That's silly. If you look at, say, I believe his name is Khalid Hosseini, who wrote The Kite Runner, which turned into a huge bestseller and a feature film. I believe, unless I'm mistaken, that he wrote that while he was still working in a hospital, and he would wake up 2-3 hours early and just chip away at this thing for an hour at a time. There is a broad spectrum of possibility between binary choice A and binary choice B.
Take a quick break. If you like this episode, I'd really, really appreciate it. It would mean so much to me. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the podcast. Email me at altucher@gmail.com and tell me why you subscribed. Thanks. I don't know when you were a kid, if you remember, like there was this comic book series called Secret Origins, and it was all about the secret origins of the superheroes. And it was one of my favorite comics. So let's see your secret origin. So you were running a company called BrainQUICKEN, and I surmise that this is where you developed a lot of the ideas that eventually turned into the 4-hour work week. So BrainQUICKEN was essentially a nutraceutical company of sorts that you were doing direct mail, or what was that company that you were running?
Yeah, BrainQUICKEN was my first real company, I suppose, if you want to talk about something with any kind of scale or organization. I'd had a couple of harebrained ideas before that, but
the company still exists, by the way. I just went to the website. I was thinking of ordering some medicine.
Yeah, it's not bad. I actually still use the product. I developed the product originally for myself while an undergrad at Princeton for my own sort of smart drug use, because I got nervous about all of the somewhat illicit substances I was importing under the FDA personal importation policy. So it was sort of my legal catch-all biochemical aid. BrainQUICKEN was a single SKU company, and it aimed to define a category. And the category was non-stimulant based pre-workout products. I originally began as a sort of nootropic smart drug company, and I very quickly realized, and I developed this, by the way, with basically selling the hell out of the vision and having people help me for free while I was still employed at a startup I knew was doomed to implode during the startup, the dot bubble and dot crash. So I did not just leap into the ether and cross my fingers. I developed the product and the basic manufacturing approach and all this stuff.
I want to just mention that this method of being at one job while developing another, let's say, business on the side is extremely common. And this is for the listeners' benefit, really, but for everybody, in Silicon Valley, in New York, anywhere. I stayed at HBO an entire 2 years while completely developing my first business totally on the side, at night, in the morning, locking myself in the conference room, whenever I could find spare moments. So it's a very common story, and it's also how you mitigate risk.
Absolutely, definitely. And I mean, in the beginning, you do have to hustle a little bit, and don't be afraid. This is one thing that I've noticed is a lot of would-be entrepreneurs are afraid to ask their family and friends to help them. And in my particular case, I had very good friends at this company, and I just said, "Hey guys, I know this is going to sound weird, but I've bought you booze in the past. I need you guys to commit to just buying one bottle of this stuff so I can actually afford my first manufacturing run."
That's great.
And they're like, "Whatever, fine, okay." And it wasn't a big deal. And I had the web designer at the company.
It's an easy sell. You say it's going to make you smarter and your business succeed.
Yeah, right. So what I realized very quickly when I got out into the wild and started doing testing is that Americans do not want to be smarter in general. It's really, really hard to sell an intelligence aid in the US. It's brutally hard. And I spent a lot of money on print advertising, radio advertising before I learned that lesson. And the way that I figured out the sort of right turn to make it work was I had a lot of NCAA athletes and professional athletes who would purchase the product, try it for some cognitive effect, and then ended up getting performance gains in primarily sports that involved reaction speed of some type. So tennis, track and field, etc. And it took me a long time to finally basically observe the obvious, which was this has the potential to be a non-stimulant pre-workout product, which is actually, in fact, one of the sort of off-label uses I had implemented myself. And so I repositioned the whole thing for people who are, number one, very price insensitive athletes, and number two, who are very affordable to reach on a sort of cost per acquisition basis, because I could go after very targeted specific sports like powerlifting, boxing, MMA at the time, which was very nascent. And in fact, sponsored a number of the UFCs. If you look at some of the very early UFCs, you'll see BodyQuick, which was the repositioned product, or BodyQuicken on the turnstiles or the sort of the corner buckles in the UFC, which was on pay-per-view and everything else. That company was built out. It was mostly direct response, but as you probably would imagine, once something is successful in direct response, you start getting wholesale inquiries, and it ended up with distribution in about, I'd say, 12 to 20 countries or so.
Were you in like GNC or any supermarkets or anything?
It was in some supermarkets. It was mostly an independently owned either sports nutrition or vitamin shops of various types.
And how long did it take you to make this transition from BrainQUICKEN to BodyQuicken? Like, when did you make the switch?
It took about 6 months, I'd say, 6 to 12 months to figure it out and to really also just find my feet as an entrepreneur. The disadvantage that I had at the time, which people don't have now, is I literally had an extremely long testing cycle with, say, print advertising and whatnot. I had to wait weeks or months to get sales data to determine if something was working or not.
Did print advertising work at all?
Print actually did work. And I think that many of these avenues that are thought of as very quaint and old-fashioned are fantastic opportunities for the right companies. I think my general approach with customer acquisition is go where the fewest people are fishing, right? If you can go after inventory that is undervalued because it's out of fashion, you can find some tremendous deals. So even though it's most expedient to test on, say, Facebook or Google AdWords, whether it's contextual advertising or pay-per-click in other fashions, I think there's tremendous opportunity in offline advertising or radio, for instance. And a number of my startups like Reputation.com had done tremendously well with direct response advertising off of the web. And so anyway, that's a longer answer perhaps than was intended, but that's how the company got up and running, and eventually you developed a lot of the automation and productivity hacks, if you want to look at them that way, systems, out of necessity, because I got to a point in 2004, and I'm sure you've been there before, where I was doing really well financially, and I was completely miserable. I mean, just utterly miserable, and destroying my relationships. And a long-term girlfriend at the time broke up with me because all I did was work.
What did she say? Did she just like walk out, or did she insist on more time from you?
She gave me, I actually still have this. She gave me what looks like a plaque of sorts, although it's actually one of those photo holders that you could get at Target that have the 3 panes and they fold out to stay standing on top of a mantle or whatnot. And it had this is incredible. I had a collage made of a photograph of my head and then a bunch of construction paper. And it was me running with a briefcase with papers flying out of it. And underneath it said business hours end at 5 p.m. with an exclamation point or 3 after it. And, then it was love and her
Very
name.
creative.
It was very creative, but it was effectively, a Dear John letter, or it was an ultimatum in disguise that I didn't recognize at the time because I had my head so far up my ass. And she left, and honestly, I lacked so much self-awareness at the time, and I probably still do in some ways, that it came as a complete surprise that she would not want to be in an intimate relationship with someone who worked from like 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
I can see that could be a problem. I mean, you were obviously affected by this. Did you try to win her back? Did you say, I'm going to cut down my hours?
No, I tried to win her back later. This is somewhat tragically amusing. So I started the transformation or the reassessment that is sort of the beginning of the 4-hour work week, which was buying this one-way ticket to London to kind of spec out 3 to 4 weeks to either redesign the business and extricate myself or shut it down. That was the objective. And
could you have sold it at this point?
At that point, probably it wasn't even in my mind as an option. If you want to talk about reality being negotiable and the possibilities and being limited by your own beliefs, I assumed it couldn't be sold. So I didn't even look at that option, which ended up being completely unfounded. And as soon as I started doing a lot of angel investing and advising much later, 2007 plus, I realized, holy this doesn't have to be so damn complicated. I can sell this. And I sold the company in 2009, which was much easier than I could have possibly imagined.
Did you tell me what in 2009, what did you sell it for?
Yeah, I don't talk publicly about the sales price. It wasn't enough to retire or fall with.
We won't tell anyone.
Yeah, right. No, it was a decent chunk of change, but not enough to say retire on if I believed in the concept of retirement. But it was a comfortable chunk of change that reflected a nice multiple on revenue. There's always a longer story related to the sale. Well, check this out. So the sale, think about the timing of this. So the conversation for the sale started, I'm guessing, early to mid 2008, and I might be screwing up the timing, but a number of the financiers who were putting money into purchasing the company were based in London. All right, so what do we run into now? So we have a pound sterling dollar conversion rate that's very important to this transaction. So what else happened in 2008, 2009? Everything collapsed. The whole world collapses, and all of a sudden the deal is in jeopardy because they're upside down. The deal is suddenly 2-3x more expensive than they anticipated. So we had to do a bunch of really unorthodox stuff, meaning sort of a partial payment at one point with a promissory note contingent upon the certain triggers like the exchange rate reaching a certain parity and like all this crazy stuff, which was a great exercise. Like it ended up panning out, thankfully. But
were you scared? I mean, because those types of negotiations, for me, I find to be the most stressful.
Of course, it was very stressful, not entirely for financial reasons. And I'm sure there are people listening to this who can understand. This had become my baby in so many ways. And it was a baby that I didn't want to spend any more time with. There was that. But nonetheless, I had dedicated so many years of my life to building it that I had an irrational, on some level, attachment to seeing it taken care of, and being caught in this limbo was very, very stressful and uncomfortable for me.
Did you get like angry at anybody? Like, you don't seem like an angry sort of guy. Did you scream at anybody in the middle of this?
No, I didn't. I didn't scream at anybody because, and maybe this is odd, but I deal with catastrophic circumstances very, very well. So I was never in the military, but I always thought I might actually operate well in a sort of high stress combat environment. I've been around car accidents. I've seen people just get dismembered in front of me, and I've been able to respond. I've done some EMT training. I'm able to respond really well in disasters. I don't get angry. Where I get angry is with the really small stuff that I know is a result of human beings being idiots or being irresponsible or not delivering things on deadline. Drive me absolutely insane. And I'm trying to get better at that, but I've such an extreme level of impatience for people who are competent but behave as if they were incompetent. That's what I get upset about. Like, very talented people who deliver stuff habitually late makes me so angry. It's disproportionate, perhaps, to the stimulus. But
well, like, what do? Do you yell at them? Do you fire them? What do you do?
I fire them. I don't yell typically, because it doesn't get you anywhere and it just causes more problems. But I get upset. I do get upset. I'm just like, you knew this, you promised this other thing, and yet here we are with a number of large problems that were created because you didn't do what you said you were going to do. That's unacceptable.
Well, let's talk about this on an industry level, because you've dealt with several industries that are filled with intelligent, competent people, but the industries themselves are so fractured and incompetent almost structurally that it's hard not to turn these intelligent people into incompetent people. And I'm talking about both publishing and television. So BrainQUICKEN, you experimented on yourself, you developed all of the techniques in the 4-Hour Workweek, which I'm sure everyone's read it, but if you haven't, I really encourage people to read it because it's incredibly useful for creating a 4-Hour Workweek, which you successfully essentially turned BrainQUICKEN into for you. That was your 4-Hour Workweek job. And
yeah,
then,
well, just a quick funny side note on that. Of all the titles we were considering for the book, so one of the original sort of 12 titles or so was the 2-Hour Workweek, and my publisher thought that was too unrealistic, so we settled on testing the 4-Hour Workweek.
Yeah, somebody once asked me I might have written about this once. I said you would have. I was just guessing. I said you probably would have called it the 0-Hour Workweek if you could, but that wouldn't have been realistic. So through testing, I know you figured out 4 was like the right number. Because people don't want to work. Like people want a 0-Hour Workweek.
Well, the other thing is that I was in 2005 spending 2 hours, literally 2 hours a week, managing all BrainQUICKEN related stuff. That's a whole separate conversation on testing titles and whatnot.
But did your testing technique for Choose Yourself? Because my initial title was the Choose Yourself era. And I had this weird problem where I couldn't say the word era. It sounded like error. Or it sounded like, one editor said, is this a book about anthropology? So speaking of Tucker Max, he said, why don't you test it against Pick Yourself? And I didn't really like Pick Yourself either because like Pick Your Nose. So I said, okay, let's just do Tim Ferriss's technique. So we did Choose Yourself, Pick Yourself, the Choose Yourself era, and then like 10 other titles. And then we did the same thing with subtitles. And that's how we came up with the title and the subtitle. So thank you for the idea.
Of course. Yeah, it's great to trust your gut, but you should verify with numbers.
I don't trust my gut at all. I'm a former day trader by profession, and I ran a hedge fund. And I quickly learned my gut is filled with all sorts of toxic bacteria, and I totally needed to rely only on software. So I didn't trust my gut at all. My gut was always wrong.
But I took you off course. You were talking about publishing and TV, where otherwise very competent people sometimes are cornered or put into a position where they can't do their best work, to put it
right, because we both know
way.
very smart people in publishing, and it's not their fault. So I don't want to blame anybody. But one thing about you is that you reinvent yourself quite a bit. So you say BrainQUICKEN was your baby, but at some point you decided, you know what? I'm also gonna not only am I gonna sell these nutraceuticals, but heck, I've never done it before. I'm gonna write a book, and you went ahead and did it. Like from while you're running BrainQUICKEN. Why did you decide that everybody in the world needs to hear what you have to say about this? You have to have a certain ego to write a book.
Well, I wish I could take credit for it, honestly. I was a reluctant writer. My senior thesis during undergrad almost killed me. I actually took a year off away from school, partially just to work on this thing because I was convinced I wouldn't ever finish it. And I vowed to myself after graduating that I would never write anything longer than an email ever again, which clearly has not panned out. But the way the book came together was, number one, I'm a compulsive note taker. So hypergraphia, maybe, if you want to give it a diagnosis. I have dozens and dozens of notebooks. I take notes all the time. I record notes. And it's very, very, very hard to find me at any time, anywhere, without a pen or something to write with handy. And I collected all of my notes on these learnings and tactics and different tests and so on as I was streamlining BrainQUICKEN and removing myself from it as a bottleneck and putting systems in place. So I had all these notes simultaneously, beginning in, I want to say 2003 or so. So keeping in mind that I started the company, I guess 2001. Starting in 2003, one of my former professors, a great guy named Ed Schau, Zschau, who'd been a congressman, competitive figure skater, had taken
at the
companies
same
public.
time. No
Yeah,
less.
I'm not kidding. This guy is the world's most interesting man. he taught a class that I took called High Tech Entrepreneurship. And starting in 2003, I believe, he invited me to come back once or twice a year to talk about self-funding or bootstrapping as opposed to venture backing. And I was going to these classes and I had to come up with content. So I started testing a lot of the material that would later become parts of the book, The 4-Hour Workweek. But I never had any intention to write the book. After all these classes, I would send email feedback forms. I wanted to get feedback. And how could I improve it? What did you like most? What did you like least? Etc. Just to teach the class more effectively next time. And at one point, one of the students, this is Princeton, you got to keep in mind, there are a lot of snarky people there and a lot of pompous people there. And I'm sure I was probably a bit of both when I was there and maybe afterwards. But the point being, a student gave some feedback in the other comments or any additional comments, which was, I don't understand why you're teaching a class of 50 students. Why don't you just write a book and be done with it? And I don't think that was actually a serious recommendation.
It almost sounds like a little bit of an FU there.
I think it actually probably was. And nonetheless, it planted this seed. And I had no desire to write a book, but I was up late one night, and this is probably 2004, 2005, and I started looking at books and book proposals and book publishing. I was like, you know what? I have a couple hours to kill. Let me just have a glass of wine and I'm going to check this out. So I started messing around with it and looking back at my notes and just coming up with book titles. I like headlines. I did direct response for years. I'm like, you know what? Let me just what would chapter headlines? Oh, this is really funny. Ha, ha, ha. Probably a little drunk at this point. Like, what would I call the book? Blah, blah, blah. Very, very much just an exercise in fun. It wasn't intended to be anything. And then at one point, I sent Jack Canfield a note, and we had this very intermittent sort of philosophical exchange. I would contact him for asking him for very real advice on some life decision or philosophical decision that I needed to make. It was very seldom something super specific or an introduction or whatever. And I asked him one of these questions, and then at the end of the email, I was like, hey, this student recommended I write a book about blah, blah, blah. I mocked up a cover and a back cover. Pretty hilarious. What do you think? And pretty much right out of the gate, he said, well, you should totally do it. I could see it on Fox and Friends. You should talk to is this person, this person, this person. And before I knew it, the cat was kind of out of the bag, if that's even an expression. I don't know. It sounds right. And he'd made introductions to a couple of potential agents, all of whom said no. A number of gave me good advice. Why did they say no? Well, I wasn't even trying to sell the thing, but they were like, what were some of the reasons? This doesn't fit into a clean category. I don't know where this would be slotted. This isn't what publishers are looking for. All the same kind of routine lines that you hear in both publishing and television and movies, right? It's just the same stuff. Right. A number of them gave me good advice, even though they said no, which I appreciated. Like saying no is fine, but I do appreciate some parting advice, which a number of them gave me. And then I ended up signing with Steve Hanselman, who was just becoming an agent at that time and had been a superstar editor and had acquired a bunch of really fantastic books in his previous career as an editor, like You, the Owner's Manual, and a bunch of really big winners. So that's how the whole thing got started. I was never intending to write the book. There was no courage on my part in jumping into the deep end that way. I was sort of goaded, and not goaded, but it's like spurred along, and very inadvertently ended up trying to sell a book.
And at this point, did you have the title, or had you done that testing yet?
No, I hadn't done the testing yet. The title, this is probably another reason I was turned down. It had a horrible original title. Oh my God. And I'm so glad it didn't pan out. It was called Lifestyle Hustling. I mean, just like the worst imaginable title for me. I came up with far worse titles to test later, but
yeah, there was like the drug dealing one, drug dealing for fun and profit.
Drug dealing. Oh, so it was Lifestyle Hustling at the very beginning, at the proposal stage. And then I think when it got sold, it had drug dealing for fun and profit, which is problematic on many levels. But I still like that title. I still like that title. I still think I could have made it work, but it wouldn't have spread as far and wide as the 4-Hour Workweek.
Oh my God. So how can you now do something that has that title in whatever form? Like what can you do? Like a podcast with that title, or
I probably
a supplementary report?
Yeah, I mean, I could do a new nutraceutical line. It's just called Drug Dealing for Fun and Profit. Just so
seriously, actually, like right now, here's where you can buy the ingredients. Here's how you can package them. Here's how I would use Google ads or Facebook ads or ClickBank to put together an info product and sell it. Like, here's how from scratch, BrainQUICKEN in a box, drug dealing for fun and profit.
I've had a lot of people ask me for that. The liability is just so off the charts. I was like, yeah, there's no way, man. You're kind of on your own. I'm sorry.
All right, fair enough. We're just brainstorming.
No. I love brainstorming, but I'd say since I've also talked about that title so much, I'd be amazed if there aren't 100 squatters all over it at this point. So on to the next thing.
Okay, so you did the book, you sold it, it became a bestseller. And then 4-Hour Body, I feel like you're starting to figure out what your core message is, which is really, again, not necessarily about, 4-hour work weeks or losing a lot of weight, which you cover in the 4-Hour Body, among other things, or, learning how to learn, which you cover in the 4-Hour Chef. But again, it's this idea that let's question the impossible. And is it really impossible? And if not, how can we get through it? And it seems like you get closer and closer to that core message.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. Because the 4-Hour Body, I could have very easily done the 4-Hour Work Week, part 2 or whatever. And that would have been the layup and the easier path. But I really did not, by that point, and this is, I'd say, 2008 or so, 2009, when I'm starting to think about perhaps another set of subject matter. And I was so sick of talking about email autoresponders and so on ad nauseum in every interview that I wanted to take a complete lateral move and do something entirely aside from business.
So you wrote a book about orgasms.
So I wrote a book including 2 chapters on female orgasm, which got the book pulled out of Costco as a side note. But the 4-Hour Body was really represented an obsession of mine that predated the 4-Hour Work Week stuff by 10 plus years. So it was very appropriate. The question was, and even after the 4-Hour Work Week, right? This is a book that sold into 40 plus languages, millions of copies or whatever. It was a hard sell to make the 4-Hour Body work with retailers and everything. Like, well, we know what you did in business, but hey, man, that's not even the same category. This thing is going to fail. That the book is going to be too big. That fitness and health and all that, they don't sell internationally. You can't sell those. They don't translate well. On and on and on. And I'm not saying that was feedback from the publisher. This is feedback from, in some cases, successful authors who literally would spit up their drinks and be like, what? It's how long? It's a hardcover? It's what? That's never going to sell. They never slot those in, blah, blah, blah. Never, 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 impossible. It's like, have you tested these things? What evidence do you have for that? Oh, really? That's interesting. What data have you seen? What evidence do you have for that? And
what data did you see?
Well, no, I would ask them this, and it would just be a blank stare. They would be like, no, well, everybody knows that. It's like, really? How do they know that? Because they repeat it so often, they believe it to be true, and that's typically the answer. So, yeah, the 4-Hour Body ended up outselling the 4-Hour Work Week by a large margin and for a long period of time, and it might still even be outselling the 4-Hour Work Week.
That's really interesting. Did not know that coming into this, that the 4-Hour Body had out. So how many copies did the 4-Hour Work Week sell?
Oh boy, I'd have to check on numbers. I used to be on top of this on a weekly basis. 4-Hour Work Week,
roughly.
I mean, it's got to be in the millions, but I don't even know. I couldn't even begin to tell you what the exact numbers are.
Because I feel like with the 4-Hour Work Week, you were really touching into something that was impactful in a historical way, in the sense that what we saw in 2008, 2009 was the death of corporatism. This idea that if you're loyal to your 9-to-5 job, the corporation is going to be loyal to you. So that whole connection that had essentially replaced the family connection 100 years ago was now dying. So people actually needed to figure out how to work a 4-hour work week. And so I felt, in terms of societal impact, that was a very powerful book, and it triggered a huge revolution in thinking about essentially work. The 4-Hour Body is great. It just surprised me it sold more than the 4-hour work week.
Not in total at this point, keeping in mind that the 4-hour work week had a head start by many years, 3 years. And then there was the revised edition, the expanded and updated edition of the 4-hour work week, which was full of case studies, which I'm thinking of doing a completely separate book just of case studies, which I think would be just amazing.
Totally should, because the world has changed too. Now you really can create a 4-hour business, that
it's so easy now. It's so easy.
It's easy and it's different than it was 10 years ago.
Totally different. I mean, now, don't get me wrong. I think the principles Even the tools in the 4-Hour Work Week, especially the expanded and updated edition, still work. But there are other tools and other approaches. I mean, for instance, I've helped a number of companies and people with Kickstarter campaigns. And these are companies that are now doing, in some cases, $500,000 a month or $1 million a month in sales. Kickstarter just didn't exist. And similar options, whether it's Indiegogo or using things like Celery to do pre-order campaigns where you're not charging credit cards, but doing it in an organized, legal fashion. Not only that, but the scope of businesses that can be created by using the flexible principles in the 4-Hour Work Week, 80-20 Parkinson's, a lot of the systems thinking is so far ranging. People think company, they think product. It's like, wait. I know actors who have used this for their careers. I know lawyers who have used this. I know designers who have used this. I know YouTube stars who have used this. I mean, it's so far reaching. And so to show people the spectrum of all of those options, I think would be really fun.
Well, it's interesting because the 4-Hour Work Week, you're right. Every principle and like the 80-20 rule you refer to, throughout your books and throughout a lot of different things, all of these rules and principles, though, are incredibly valuable. But right now, in particular, it's like taking those and you can almost make like a 4-hour-pedia of all the different types of businesses that can be started and exactly how, like plug and play, exactly how people can do it. And I think that would be an incredible idea.
Yeah. No, I agree.
So you fantasize about doing 4-Hour Work Week. What would you even call it? You can't call it the 8-Hour Work Week. You have to come up with a really good title here.
Yeah, I'm going to come up with a good title, but let's call it... No, I won't even call it anything. I'll tell you, because here's another sort of publishing tip that people might find helpful. If you have an audience or you're being watched for what you're going to do next, you should get into the habit, in my opinion, of using red herrings in some cases. So after the 4-Hour Work Week, I became very acutely aware of how painful it can be to have people squat on your intellectual property or infringe on your intellectual property and use your photographs and use your trademarks to sell stuff that you have no association with, many things that could be very damaging to you. That's been an ongoing battle. So typically, for instance, when I published the 4-Hour Body, prior to that, I put up a post announcing what the new project was going to be because I wanted to marshal resources and find interviewees and so on. But I didn't use the real title because I knew that people would immediately go to Twitter, they would immediately go to Instagram, had it existed at the time, grab handles and grab URLs to try to squat on them to extort money from me later, or to simply attract traffic from searches at a later point in time so they could monetize it with advertising. There's just a lot of unethical behavior that is automatic. It's triggered in hundreds and thousands of people when you give people advance notice about what you're going to do if you haven't already secured every possible imaginable permutation. And to save myself that labor, when I announced it, I called it, I think, Becoming Superhuman or something like that, because I wanted to provide them with fodder as a false lead.
So once you put out 4-Hour Body, did suddenly everybody start registering the 4-Hour Investor, the 4-Hour, president? I don't know, all the different permutations there?
Yeah, I mean, people have tried that and done that. Ultimately, I've registered trademarks for 4-Hour as a prefix. So there is going to have to be, and there is some ongoing stuff that I won't bore you with, but I hate that it comes down to this, but there is going to be a legal reckoning for almost all of these people. There are fights worth fighting, and then there are fights not worth fighting, but there are also battles you have to fight to maintain your intellectual property rights, unfortunately. So
man, I almost feel like registering the 3.5-hour work week right now.
You can go for it. But
I'll give it to you for free if you go for that.
I appreciate that. I would just say this, guys. It's like you can ride on someone else's coattails. It's intellectually lazy, and I find unethical. It's like, try to create something of value. If you leave this planet without creating something original of value, I view that life as being wasted and squandered. Along the same lines, we all have critics. Focus on the people who get it, not the people who don't get it. And if you're trying to decide sort of which side of the fence to fall on as a supporter or detractor, just watch Ratatouille and listen to the Anton Ego speech at the end, which is the final review of Gusto's restaurant. But basically, he says, the piece of work that we critics designate as garbage is worth less than what we're designating as garbage. You can either focus on building something of value or propagating other things of value that you find, therefore sort of increasing the karmic value you add to the universe, or you can nip at people's heels and sort of spread vitriol and spit acid, which net really does no good for anyone.
And I highly recommend, you wrote a post on this once, which I've referred to, because it's at some point it gets painful for anybody who's trying to put themselves out there and they start to get just criticisms that are riding those coattails. They're criticizing for no other reason than riding the coattails. And you wrote a very good post a few years ago about dealing with the haters that I thought was very good.
Yeah, how to deal with haters. And it pulls from quotes from Colin Powell and some of the Stoics and some of the top sports agents in the world, just to point out that if you're doing everything right, if you're doing your job well, 90% of what's said about you will have some negative tinge to it. I mean, it sounds unbelievable and outrageous, and that's just the nature of anonymity and the internet. And to contend with that, you have to arm yourself philosophically and tactically to contend with that type of landscape. It's very, very tough. There are times when the turkeys get you down, and it's very tempting.
Some will be lucky. Some will hit the right buttons that were in you from birth, or from whatever, and they'll just get lucky. If 1,000 people criticize you and you're looking at all of them, one of those 1,000 is going to seem like your mother yelling at you, and that's going to be painful.
Yeah, it'll trigger something. So, I mean, I think the post is just how to deal with haters, or 7 principles on how to deal with haters, something like that. If you search on Google, it'll pop right up, just my name and how to deal with haters. And it's just a pragmatic toolkit for people who want to create value, but who are not going to be Pollyanna-ish about it. Recognize you're going to have, for every supporter you have, someone in the opposite camp who's charging at you, who just verbally and emotionally wants to put you on a spear. And you have to get accustomed to that. Even if you're a nonprofit, for God's sake, I mean, it's like you see some unbelievable stuff.
Well, and you had the common, almost the elephant in the room. Tim Ferriss doesn't really work 4 hours. He's the hardest working guy I know. So I would see that criticism of you, which is oddly a criticism that you didn't work 4 hours, even though that's not really what your book's about. Your book is about putting these systems in place. So if you have a business like BrainQUICKEN, you can have 36 hours to do things you enjoy, or 38 hours or whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then I think that first of all, I don't go looking for the negative stuff, and there's plenty of positive stuff too. I don't go looking for the negative. I think that's a bad habit. I very rarely respond to the negative, particularly if it reflects someone who hasn't done even a modicum of research. If they haven't read the book and they're criticizing me based off of the title, there's really nothing to be talked about. A general principle in life, I think, is that you can't reason someone out of a position they didn't reason themselves into. Does that make sense? It's a waste of breath. It's a waste of time.
I totally agree. And one thing I will add to that is what I call the 24-hour rule, which is that if you do respond to the haters like that, then you've kept the issue alive for another 24 hours instead of just letting it die.
Yeah, starving it of oxygen. Also, for just very specific search engine rules, you do not want to add Google juice to something by drawing attention to it. And there are many people who will write really hateful, ridiculous kind of articles about me that are devoid of content just because they want me to respond and send traffic to their sites. And I just never respond to those things. And they end up attracting people who are hateful to their sites, which is their own form of punishment. Like, that audience is going to turn on you at the very least.
That's a very good point, actually.
To those people that haven't heard the 4-Hour Workweek, the reason that 4-Hour Workweeks has been, praised by hedge fund managers, some of the top venture capitalists in the world, very publicly, I mean, in the New York Times, and these types of people, not because they want to work 4 hours a week, but because they want to maximize their per hour output. That is the point of the book. You maximize your per hour output, and then what you choose to do with that new toolkit is up to you. And in my case, I don't want to sit around and stare at the wall watching paint dry for the rest of my life. So I have the luxury at this point of doing with my time whatever I want to do with my time. And I choose things like writing on the blog. I love doing it. I love interacting with my audience. Or, I spent a ton of time on experimenting and trying to capture that for people because I view myself as a teacher first and foremost. I always wanted to teach. I thought it was going to be 9th or 10th grade, but instead it ended up being via books and the blog.
So let's talk about that, because you've also said often writing, and a lot of authors say this actually, writing a book is a very unpleasant experience. Like, so you're used to going out there and doing things in the world. And when you write a book, you have to essentially spend a year or two or more sitting behind a computer for hours a day doing brain activity into this computer. It's painful.
Yeah, it is painful. It's a very isolating process. I mean, for me, it's like being in solitary confinement, and it's not always unpleasant. There are rare moments where you bottle the lightning and you have just a streak of a few hours where you're really on fire and you're putting together some of your best stuff and it's funny and you're making yourself laugh. And I love those moments, but they do not constitute the majority of the time spent writing. I mean,
particularly with your books, like your books are almost like they're packaged books. Like 4 Hour Chef is a work of art. Like, it's just a beautiful book all around. Like, with what is there, 700 or 800 photos in there? How many photos were in the 4 Hour Chef?
I think there are 1,000+ photographs. I actually, just to be a glutton for punishment, probably took 20 to 30% of those myself. Probably 20%, just to try to learn photography, which was in retrospect kind of a foolish masochistic decision. I had fun, but it was too much additional work. And it has a few hundred illustrations. So that book, part of the point of that book for me was to create a beautiful physical object, which not surprisingly is very challenging to do.
Yeah.
It's really involved. But the act of writing, I find painful most of the time. There are the moments where because as a writer, if you're a solo writer, if you don't have a co-author, there are times when you are the architect, where you're designing the cathedral, and it's this really inspiring, exciting period. The vast majority of the time, you're the bricklayer. And that is really tough grunt work. And then there's, of course, at the end, you can look upon this hopefully beautiful structure that's highly functional and admire it for, look back with pride on it for years and decades, ideally. But it's a very tough process. Now, what I would say is you don't necessarily choose, or I don't necessarily choose my projects based on the ratio of pleasure to pain. This might sound weird, but I think there's value from going through pain. And I voluntarily introduce pain to my life in the form of unpleasant workouts, or meditating when I really don't want to meditate, when it's the last thing I want to do. That's when I most need to meditate. And I remember I was told once, if you don't have 30 minutes to meditate, you need 3 hours. And
that's similar to a quote from Gandhi, actually. So Gandhi told all of his advisors, I need an hour a day to meditate. And his advisor said, no, Gandhi, you don't have an hour. And then Gandhi said to them, okay, now I need 2 hours to meditate.
Yeah, exactly. So if the way that relates to writing is I enjoy expanding my sphere of comfortable action. And you only do that by subjecting yourself to discomfort and pain and challenging situations. I think there's a real danger when you have even the barest level of success. Like you said, when you have a 9-to-5 job and there's the risk of becoming comfortable and complacent, that is a very dangerous place. It's a really dangerous place to sit. And
I wonder if that's what got you out of the, let's call it the 4-hour genre. Like you went from 4 Hour Chef to essentially doing a TV show.
Yeah.
Which by the way, isn't called the 4-hour TV show.
No, it's not. And it's called Tim Ferriss Experiment. And actually the latest update on that, we can talk about all sorts of aspects of this, but I'm really happy that I started the podcast in the last few weeks, which I'd been hoping to do for more than a year, probably 2 years. And thank you for a lot of your advice related to the podcast, by the way. Because of some internal issues at Turner Broadcasting, the launch of the TV show has yet again been delayed and postponed with no particular sort of launch date in its place. So it's been...
I know I've been very upset because I only was able to see the Stuart Copeland episode. I wanted to see the poker episode, actually.
The poker episode is awesome. I am working tirelessly. So any of you who were kind enough to offer support with the show in any way, I am fighting my ass off. The Turner people and I want a lot of the same things. It's really just a matter of figuring out how to allocate resources, and just there. I won't bore you with all the internal sort of stuff that all the people on the Turner team who want to see this show get out in the open as well. Big companies are hard. Big companies are just very challenging, not only if you're dealing, interacting with them from the outside, and they're very resource rich. There are reasons to work with big companies, but they're very challenging political animals. And
So let me give you an idea. Let me give you an idea to do. Because like if you end up on, Headline News or True TV or any of these kind of like channels on, channel 187 on cable, you're going to have 10,000 viewers. So
Right.
what you should do, you have a huge blog, just tell them you'll sell for $5 an episode. Do a Louis C.K. Sell for $5 an episode, every episode. I'm a buyer. Everybody I know is going to be a buyer. All your readers are going to be buyers. That's how they're going to make their money on this.
Yeah, I'm working on it. So I'll figure out a way to. I'm really working hard to figure out a way to make it work. So I remain confident, and part of the reason I remain confident, I'll tell you, is when people come to me to ask about books, 90% of the time, if not more, the questions are all related to marketing and PR. And I don't want people to discount the value of those things, but the marketing and PR potential is decided by the product. And I spent so much freaking time on this show and these episodes and the teachers and the lessons and the tools and all this stuff. I know it can find a home. I know the product can speak for itself. That's why I'm not freaking out completely. And I feel like with books, for instance, or any type of content, you have to focus on the content first and foremost, especially in a world that has social media available as these Archimedes levers and rebroadcast platforms. If you have a really good product and you can pick your 1,000 first fans properly and target them, and everybody should read 1,000 True Fans by Kevin Kelly. Not everyone agrees with it. I happen to think it's genius. It's a very short piece. It's the only thing I think you probably ever need to read about marketing. If you had to pick one thing, you can have a enormously successful product. And this goes for blog posts as well. One good blog post, I'd love to hear your thoughts, because I know for my blog, at least, there have been a handful of posts that made the blog. They just, like, I put the time or the emotion or whatever into the posts, and literally one blog post can change your life completely. I really strongly believe that.
That's very true, but it's a little bit of the 80-20 rule. So like 20% of your posts will get 80 or 90% of the traffic to your blog. It's hard to know sometimes in advance. I love writing, for instance, my very personal stories, and I think that's my best writing, but that's not necessarily the most popular post. So I write so I can get this kind of creative outlet, but I also write these other posts that I know have a lot of value and will get a lot of traffic and so on.
No, agreed. I'm going to be writing a post soon about blogging and the lessons that I've learned, because I've now just crossed the 500 post barrier, which kind of blew my mind. And what I've realized, I was looking at questions that people wanted me to answer in this post, this sort of recap of the last many years blogging, and I realized you don't always write for other people. You should, I think, in some cases, write for yourself. And so there are posts that I've written that are really just for me. Even if I only have 100 readers for that particular post, there are posts that I want to put out there. And there's some posts I've put out that are like collections of resources that I think are really valuable that get next to no response. I mean, literally, 1 to 5 comments. And these are posts that take 100 times longer to write than some of the emotional outpourings that get 700 comments.
People, a little bit of it is a supply and demand function. So you're actually not incredibly personally revealing on your website. Even though you're very personal, like you discuss every way you experiment on your body. You discuss how you learn the languages, how you learn to be a chef. You discuss the BrainQUICKEN stuff in your books. But I'm sure through all this process, let's say TV or selling the business or some part of this process, you probably got depressed at some point. And you know what? I want to read about when Tim Ferriss got depressed and how he got over it.
Oh, definitely. And actually, one of the posts that I put up that I expected to get a decent response that just received an insanely overwhelming response that you might find entertaining is actually exactly about this. It's called Productivity, in quotation marks, Productivity Tricks for the Neurotic, Manic, Depressive, and Crazy, and then in parentheses, like me. It has almost 800 comments, and it's about a really dark period that I went through. Not all too...
What was going on?
Let's see. It's been a while since this published. This was sort of the end of 2013, November that it came out. And I sat on the post for months. I actually kind of put it together, and then I was too self-conscious to publish it until
the advice I gave Kamal when he wrote Love Yourself, he was a little nervous about publishing it, because it's very, very revealing. And I said, Kamal, I don't even hit publish on something unless I'm scared what people will think of me when I publish it. So, but to be fair, Kamal did think about it for a while before publishing it. But I know, and the reason I'm asking you about depression is because I know you then tweeted his book shortly thereafter, after he published it. So I knew you must have been going through something.
Oh yeah, and I read the whole book. It's a great book. The quote that got me to publish this post, and this is in line with what you just said, but this is from Neil Gaiman, who's one of my favorite writers.
Sandman is the all-time best.
Oh my God. Sandman, American Gods. I mean, the list is so long. The Graveyard Book is one of the best audiobooks I've ever heard in my life. He narrates it, and he's just a world-class narrator.
Oh, I'll pick that up. I haven't listened to that.
It's so good. This is one of the few books ever of any genre, fiction or nonfiction, that as soon as I finished the audiobook, I was tempted to just go right back to the beginning and listen to the whole thing again. So Neil Gaiman, here's the quote. Quote, "The moment that you feel that just possibly you're walking down the street naked, exposing too much of your heart and your mind and what exists on the inside, showing too much of yourself, that's the moment you may be starting to get it right." End quote.
That's a great quote.
And basically, I went through a point, this was last summer, I guess, where I had a dozen friends or so come over for my birthday. I was on the East Coast, and I stayed in bed on the very last day when I knew people were leaving. I stayed in bed until the very last point, like basically my head under the covers, hitting snooze and whatever, because I was afraid of being alone, and I felt very lonely, and I was just having all these different facets of self-doubt. And I wanted to put a post together talking about this because I think it's dangerous for people to look at their sort of virtual role models, whether they view them as successful people or heroes or whatever it might be, and because of the selection bias of the content that these people put out, to assume that they don't have, quote, normal people problems, if that makes sense. And I wanted to just take people through a bunch of the horribly inefficient behaviors that I have, as well as just walk them through a handful of these deep-rooted insecurities and horrible behaviors that I have trouble managing, and to point out that despite that, and all of that seemingly dysfunctional stuff, I'm able to achieve like bullet, right? So it's not that I'm able to do seemingly big things because I've eradicated all of these foibles and very human weaknesses. It's despite them. Maybe on some level because of them, I don't know. But that was the entire point. The point of the post, and I don't want to, it's a decently long post, so I don't want to bore everybody by going through it kind of paragraph by paragraph, but that's the basic idea. And if people search my name and neurotic and crazy, they'll probably pop right up.
Well, let's also talk about more recently then with TV is a lot of work. And you shot, I don't know, how many episodes did you shoot already that are in the can?
13 episodes, excluding all the promotional stuff, which is much more than that.
And the episode that I saw was a half hour, but that must have been 200 hours worth of work or more.
Easily. That was a very intense period, completely not financially driven because TV pays horribly. It was 12 to 16 hour days. That's not an exaggeration.
What does it pay? Like did they give you a budget for the show and you take like a producer's fee?
Yeah. I was an executive producer and a host. Can't get into the numbers because I'd be in breach of contract, but it's not much. I'll just put it that way. It was one of from an opportunity cost standpoint, if we're looking at it that way, it was not a good decision, but it wasn't a financial decision for me. I wanted to, before I'm in a wheelchair, capture some of these things on camera so that people can learn from them, hopefully. The point being, it was for each episode that is 21 and a half minutes, right? It's a 30-minute TV show, subtract the commercial time, 21 and a half minutes, roughly 22 minutes. It was 5 to 6 days of 12 to 16 hour days for every episode. And that, keep in mind, is just the production. That's excluding the reviews of the rough cut and all the notes and refinement, all the reviews of the fine cut, all of the refinement and changes and everything, sending screen flows, sending notes, sending sort of story points that I want to make sure are included, graphics feedback, screenshots with diagrams. I mean, all of that stuff. It was a tremendous amount of work, and I'm very
Honestly,
happy.
Tim, I don't know why you did it, actually. Like, I've shot a pilot before for HBO. It is too much work.
I'll tell you what, I wanted to do it because I'd wondered what it would be like for years and years and years. And now I know. And I worked with a fantastic team. I mean, in the field, these people were not anything less than A grade. I mean, we're talking 0.0. They do all of Anthony Bourdain's stuff. They are really lean. They're really fast. They're really, really good. And even if you are working with the best people, it is a tremendous amount of time. And what I would say is, I'm glad I did it. I wouldn't do it the same way in a second season. If I were to do it again, I'll just say that. If I were to do it again, what would I do differently? What I would do differently is, instead of doing 13, and I should also mention, reality TV in the sort of conventional sense does not take this much time, because the whole thing is scripted. For all these other shows like the Kardashians or whatever, it's all scripted. It is a scripted show. It's not reality. It's not spontaneous. If you get a phone call on camera, do you realize the probability of that happening naturally? They'd have to film 24 hours a day. It's all scripted. If you see a bunch of people standing in the kitchen having a debate and one person's always stirring some random it's scripted.
It looked like you had a lot of cameras on you. Like, they piled a lot of cameras into your room.
They had 2 camera guys for each episode, 2 DPs, who were trained to do the dance of crossing in that way without getting each other in their respective shots. It's actually really tough. It's something that ZPZ is very famous for. It's super hard to pull off. But the point being, we were capturing that much footage because we were trying to do things spontaneously and make it true to life, which it was. It was very verite, but really time consuming. What I'd do differently if I were to do it again is I would make the show at least twice as long. So it'd be an hour long. And I would space out the production so we weren't on a crash schedule. I mean, literally, it was 13 episodes, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other, flying all over the United States. It was very exhausting. If I were to do it again, I would do half as many, and I would make them an hour long, and I would make it 6 days of shooting with at least 2 days of no cameras, just me practicing stuff. And that's generally how I would approach it.
Were you ever scared that an episode would fail? For instance, like, let's just take the drumming one, that you just wouldn't learn how to drum well enough to play for Foreigner?
Oh yeah, definitely. And actually, that's an important component of the show. I don't want it to be the Tim Ferriss highlight reel. I want all the nervous breakdowns and everything to be in there. So there were episodes that didn't work out.
Like what? Can you say which one?
I'm not going to spoil the punchline. Okay. I'm going to wait. But there were episodes that did not work out. There were episodes where I got really badly injured. This is intended to be true to life and show people, if you're going to question the impossible, you're not always going to come out looking like a superhero. I mean, there are cases where it's like, oh, holy shit, like that limiter is actually very, very real.
God, I can't wait to watch the poker one. Can we buy the poker one from Turner and just release it? I'll fall Turner myself.
I'll keep you posted, man. I'm working on it right now, so I appreciate that. I'll let you know what's possible. I'm on top of it.
So now, though, that it's not quite hiatus, but you're in kind of like deal hell with them, this freed you up to do the podcast? Like, now you've just started this podcast.
Yeah, I'm having so much fun with the podcast.
Podcasts are great, by the way.
I'm having so much fun, but it's on top of that proven to be a godsend, because I'm actually not in any kind of negotiation hell with the Turner guys, because they want, in many ways, the same outcome that I do. So it's just a matter of taking a lot of sort of big company stuff and navigating it to get to that end point. So I'm confident that something will be figured out. Talk to me in a month or two and I'll have a better idea. But the podcast has just reminded me of how good it feels to have complete dictatorial creative control.
Yeah. I don't think you should ever give that up again. Like, even if you did another TV show, just sell it off your site. Again, Louis C.K. style.
No, exactly. I mean, it's just, I've realized that I love having creative input from other people. I love working with other people. It's very difficult for me to not have final say in all things creative. It's really tough because I feel like there is no one on the planet who knows my audience better than I do. I know them so well. I spend all day, every day on some level thinking about them because they are me, I am them. I've been in this for so long. I'm not always right, but I got to tell you, if someone's going to guess, if someone's going to gamble, I'm the right person for my audience. And I just love that with the podcast, I have absolute 100% decision-making power to test anything I want. You know, if I want to test a new mic and it turns out like, shame on me, but you know what? What the that's what this format is for. And I've been testing all sorts of locations and mics and audio and everything, and it's been so much fun. And as long as I'm having fun, the podcast will find an audience. Will it be number one on iTunes? I mean, it was when it first came out. I mean, it's still top 10 or 15 or whatever. Will it stay there? I don't know. But will it find an audience? As long as I'm having fun and I'm enjoying the creative process, it will. And
well, I can guarantee you this. It's going to have a bigger audience than, you know, headline news 2 or whatever, because cable just has a smaller audience than the podcast world at this point.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that particularly for my audience, it's about digital and it's about on-demand and binge capability, not scheduled watching. I just really feel like that is how I consume content. And when in doubt, create what you would want to see yourself and distribute it the way you would want to consume it yourself, right? It's kind of simple.
So it's interesting because I sort of feel like your career, you know, kind of forked off probably in some ways similar to mine, although, you know, you've had such amazing successes. But I have this writing career. I write these books. I do this podcast. And I'm also on the boards of several companies, including a public company. I'm an advisor and investor in many companies, an angel investor. You've also had this fork where because people viewed you, I'm assuming, as an authentic voice that they could trust and they loved your content, people started hiring or bringing on you as an advisor or an investor. Like, so you're an advisor to Twitter, to Uber. And my assumption is this, without really specifying exact numbers, my assumption is this is actually really the bread and the butter, although you've done well with everything else. How did you get involved with like Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter was an investment. That was 2009. And the Twitter story, well, there are different ways that I get involved with companies and there are different things I do with companies. And if people want to see my portfolio, they can get a very good look at pretty much everything by going to just angel.co. It's AngelList, angel.co/Tim. And you can see all of my stuff. And in fact, you can even invest in some of the deals that I do through their syndicate. But the way I got in touch with Twitter was living in Silicon Valley, building the relationships over time with lots of close friends that I have who are very often in tech. At one point, being told of this opportunity to buy Twitter stock from an employee who was leaving and wanted to buy a house. And it really came down to sort of the reputational capital that I built. And I was asked if I would like to buy some of the stock. And of course I said yes. Or I shouldn't say of course, because it wasn't actually clear. There were a lot of people who felt that Twitter was very, very overvalued at that point in time. And I looked at that investment as marketing budget as opposed to a purely financial investment. By being associated with Twitter, there was a reputational gain to be had because access was very, very hard. And it just so happened that Twitter, despite any of the recent challenges they've had just since the last lockup expired, has been a huge success for me. And I'm still very, very confident in the platform. Other ways that I've connected with companies would include through my followers and my readers. So I will occasionally poll readers. In one case, I polled my readers for updating resources in the 4-Hour Workweek prior to the 2009 expanded and updated launch. And that is how I identified Shopify as an extremely fast-growing, promising, and elegant e-commerce solution for people who wanted to get online quickly. And I connected through that chatter via social media with the CEO, Toby, and then we connected in person at a speaking event, and I became an advisor.
These are awesome examples because people often ask, how do you monetize a blog? And the worst answer is advertising. The best answer is building an authentic voice that then allows you to communicate with your audience and find opportunities like this. That is the way you monetize a blog.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're in a rush to do it, it's not going to work. You can't run out and make people feel like pay-for-play hired guns in a transactional way. You have to build legitimate relationships with people to explore areas that you want to explore. And I think that doesn't mean it has to take 10 years. I think you've done an incredible job of building a diehard reader base with the content that you put out. I mean, I've been very, very impressed with how well you've done that. Oh my God, it's one of the most outstanding examples. And
it's I have to say it's worked really well for me in terms of me finding opportunities similar to those. It also reminds me of the way you communicate with the readers. It reminded me of a few years ago, Chris Sacca made a tweet. It was like 3 a.m, and he basically tweeted, "Who's programming software right now, and what are you working on?" And people who responded, he considered investing. And I don't know if he invested in any of them, but that was like an interesting way to find out who's that intense working, at 3 a.m. on a software product.
Oh yeah. And Chris Sacca is one of the, easily in my mind, one of the smartest tech investors in the world today. I mean, it absolutely put him in the top 10, maybe top 5 that I've ever met. I mean, he's a brilliant guy, and he actually has taught me a lot about how these things work. He's also hilarious to follow on Twitter. So Chris Sacca, SACC. I think it's just at Sacca. What have you learned from him? Because
he learned a lot from Ron Conway, that he admits in a letter that who's one of the most successful angel investors ever.
Yeah, I mean, we could go on for a long time with what I've learned from Chris, but let me take a step back and mention one more thing: monetizing the blog, because this is something that comes out all the time. I just want to emphasize to people, money is an intermediate. It is wampum, right? It is something that you trade for possessions, experience, access to interesting people or resources. You don't need to have money as that intermediate necessarily. So my blog is interesting for me as a learning tool. For me, I learn a ton from my readers, but also because I can oftentimes get access to people and things I would otherwise not be able to access, even with money. And that is why monetizing the blog, squeezing every last dollar and cent out of that traffic, is not my highest priority. I just think it's important for people to keep that in mind.
That's incredibly important. And I always view money as a side effect. Like when you take medicine, you're looking for completely other things, and just by accident, you're going to have some side effects to it. Only way to monetize a blog is to not monetize it, to almost delay gratification as much as possible while you build up authenticity, trust, and so on in the process.
Absolutely. And so coming back to Chris, what I've learned from Chris is there's such a long list of stuff, but I think arguably the most important is the people you invest in. And you're really investing in people, not ideas, because ideas are a dime a dozen. That's even being generous. I mean, anyone can come up with great ideas. It's the implementation that's important. So if you're betting on a team or CEO, let's get even more specific. Like they should pass 2 types of tests. And I'm pretty sure that Chris mentioned at least one of these to me, but this is the general gist at least. The kind of the beer test and the mall test. What are these? The beer test is, would you invite them out to have beers? Like, would you actually want to spend 2 to 3 hours with them, hanging out, shooting the talking? Would you find that at least, stimulating? Would you do it on a somewhat regular basis? If the answer is no, given the speculative nature of startups, let's just say that you invest in 10 founders where you think the company has great prospects, but none of them pass the beer test, but they're really like hard-hitting, driven CEOs. If 9 out of 10 of them fail, that means if you're splitting your time across those 10, 9/10 of your time is going to be spent with people you dislike.
Right, and it's going to be a very unpleasant time, because when a business is failing, that's when you see someone's true colors. So you better be able to be comfortable with them.
Exactly. So there's the beer test, and then there is the mall test, which is very closely related. So that is like if you're walking around at the mall and this person is sort of walking the other way on, let's say, the opposite side of the mall. So you're on the same level, right? So you're not like 10 feet away, but you're close enough to make eye contact. Do you, number one, like run over and be like, "Oh my God, hey, what's up? How are you doing?" And like actively engage? Number two, do you kind of like give them like the wave and head nod and keep moving? Or do you like cover your face because you don't want to interact with them? And if it's anything other than number one, you really shouldn't do it. And it's closely related. So does this work all the time? No. But does it prevent you from wasting your life on people you should not spend all of your time with? Yes. And you don't have to, coming back to that sort of $15 billion plus companies per year idea, you don't need to take every good company. You don't need to get involved with every good opportunity. You just need really a handful of good bets. And you can wait. You can afford to wait for those bets. You can afford to wait for the confluence of great opportunity, great market, innovative product, and cool people. Like you can actually wait for it. And if you can't wait for it, it means that you're like banking on angel investing to pay your mortgage, which you shouldn't in the first place.
Right. That's a very important lesson too. Tim, I really appreciate it. You've been so generous with your time. This has been a great podcast. So again, Tim, thanks so much. I really think throughout all of your career, everything that's in there, you've explored, what's possible versus the imaginary probable. And this podcast was great. So thanks very much.
Yeah, my pleasure entirely. Anytime. And I've been looking forward to this for weeks now. So thank you for hosting me. And yeah, 2 R's, 2 S's. There's another Tim Ferriss, who's a great writer, science guy, actually, who lives like 5 miles away from me. So there's a lot of confusion. But
I gotta remember that. I always get it confused.
Yeah, I'm the Tim Ferriss with 2 R's and 2 S's. So hope people chime in and check out the podcast. And happy to come back anytime.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tim. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. Thanks.
Bye.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
What? This is the mindset.
Free.
This is the mantra.
Free.
This is the mindset.
With movies like Joe Dirt, Pixels, and 50 First Dates. This is awesome. And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.
You're welcome.